All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Smart, Sustainable, Electrified, the Neighborhood of the Future panel. I'm really excited. We have 4 excellent experts here today to talk about this. My name is Lauren Rieg. I am a manager at RMI doing building decarbonization policy work, and I'm also the vice president of the Renew board. So I'm excited to see you all here today and talk about this. We will be accepting questions through the app. So if you log into the session on the app, you can log in and submit questions there. So that'll be the way we take questions. So please do that at any time. And we're really going to try and prioritize audience questions today. But with that, I'm really excited to present our 4 experts here, Jeanette, Jane, Montre, and Daniel. And so we will start with an introduction to each of them. I'll ask each of you guys to give an introduction, tell us a little bit about your work, and then tell us what Neighborhood of the Future kind of means to you. Daniel, we'll start with you.
You gotta hold it, I think.
Bonjour. Bonjour, Wawabenation, Dejikaz, Makodedem, Mashkazibian Dunjaba. My name is Daniel Wiggins. I am the executive director for the Midwest Tribal Energy Resource Association. I'm about 6 months into my tenure, but I've been affiliated with Emterra for about probably 3 to 4 years, sitting on the board of directors as chair and vice chair as well. I am also coming from a Bad River tribal member who did work in Bad River as the Bad River Tribal Natural Resource Deputy Director, along with the Energy Coordinator. With Bad River, there's a lot of progressive energy projects going on up there with microgrids and mini-grids that are providing auxiliary support for buildings, but also the entire reservation. The mini-grid isn't built yet, but it is in the planning and development stages, and is planned to be, I think, implemented in 2027, providing a net zero environment for the Bad River Tribe and neighboring municipalities. Bad River is fairly aggressive with their strategic energy planning, along with providing avenues towards tribal sovereignty and energy independence. And so I guess when you're thinking about neighborhoods of the future, you're looking at independent neighborhoods. You're looking at neighborhoods that are somewhat self-sufficient within not just the energy realm, but within a lot of the other networks. So we talk about energy sovereignty a lot, but some people don't talk about food sovereignty enough in the relationship between, some of those other initiatives and energy sovereignty and energy independence. So there's a lot that goes into my future neighborhoods, especially with tribes, because I feel tribes can be a leader in this industry and a prime example of how things can be done properly with environmental and tribal values in mind. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, Daniel. Jeanette?
All right, I'm going to try this.
Awesome.
Maybe better. Hi, everybody. Jeanette Lizax. I am the Director of Research and Innovation, or one of our Directors of Research and Innovation at Slipstream. Slipstream is a nonprofit. We're actually based here in Madison, though we work lots of different areas around the Midwest and around the country. We have a mission to accelerate climate solutions for everyone, and the way we do that is through a number of different different aspects of our work. We have an education and training arm where we do trainings for building professionals, largely. We do program implementation, largely utility-funded programs that kind of similar to like an incentive program that you might see in Focus on Energy. And we also have a financing arm, Energy Financing Solutions, where we support innovative financing mechanisms. And then my team is on the research team. Our research spans quite a bit. We do everything from really couch and building science research, but we do a lot of technology research. So we're trying to understand new and emerging technologies, how they work in the field, some of which I may talk about today, but things like heat pump water heaters, or just air source water air source heat pumps, or air to water heat pumps. There's all different flavors of heat pumps that I'm happy to talk about. But we also do a lot of research and planning to support communities in understanding resiliency aspects or energy planning to help meet energy goals. And similarly, we do a lot of work around energy codes and happy to talk about that more. But in Wisconsin, it is really relevant to make sure our communities of the future have the most efficient buildings as they're being built, and energy codes is one way to reach that. So when I'm talking about neighborhoods of the future, I mean, very similar. I do feel like there's increasingly an importance around resiliency, connectedness to grids, making sure that people are living in efficient buildings, but also buildings that are resilient to increasing heat waves or flooding. And there's a lot of technologies and things that we can do right now to make sure, like, none of this is actually super future. These are things that we can do right now if we do it with thought. And I'll leave it at that. And
I really appreciate that perspective. Jane, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jane McCurry, and I'm Executive Director at Clean Fuels Michigan, which is a nonprofit trade association for the electric vehicle and alternative fuel industries in the state of Michigan. I used to work for Renew, so this is a really fun homecoming to be with this group of people again. And so when I take my transportation lens to neighborhood of the future, I think a lot about choice and community members having affordable and convenient options for both their energy resources and their mobility options. So I think about safe walking and biking lanes. I think about shared electric vehicles, having access to convenient and affordable charging for your EV or an electric bus to take you where you need to go. And then also having access to family-sustaining employment. Again, coming from Michigan, thinking about mobility, workforce is such a huge topic in this space. In Michigan, 20% of our workforce is tied to the auto industry in one way or another. So having access to those jobs of the future is something that's always top of mind. So it's not only energy choice, but employment choice, being nearby and affordable.
Awesome. I want to try to use this, see if it works. Hey, there it goes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Montre Moore, and I am the Membership and Engagement Director for the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Super happy to be here today. If you ever heard me kind of give my spiel, I always say I do way too much, but I do not do enough considering the climate emergency that we're currently facing. So super excited to share with you all just a little bit about Midwest BDC. We're currently coming up on our first anniversary, being its own 501c3. In the space, we were under Fresh Energy out of Minnesota for roughly about 3 years as we got the bulk of our programming off the ground. Our mission is goal is simple, is to decarbonize the building sector by 2050. Big, huge, lofty goal, but what does that mean? That means simply removing fossil fuels from the places that we know cause roughly 40% of the pollution that we deal with here in the Midwest. The Midwest is an amazing jewel that not only our country, but our world will soon look at as we continue to see fires, we continue to see heat waves, we continue to see droughts, because it's not going away. No matter who's saying what they say, we know what's real and what's not real. Just put our fingers in the ears and go, blah, 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 it's still real. It's not going anywhere. And so we know and understand that now is a space and time that we have to come together and galvanize this moment greater than ever. And so when we talk about neighborhoods and futures, neighborhood and cities of the futures, rather, what I see is access to everyone, allowing all communities, not just some communities, to participate in this space. We know and understand, yes, there are those who have the means to go out and make these transitions today. And what really excites me and gives me a lot of courage and enthusiasm is there's no new technology that needs to be developed. It's literally already here. It's our mindset that we have to change. And so knowing and understanding that, we have to ensure that all communities participate in this, because those left behind will also be those left behind. That's us. We can't move without all of us going together. This is our planet. So we have to do our best to save it. That's my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you really appreciate your answers there. So neighborhood of the future is going to require technological advancement. It's going to require policy work, and it's also going to require conversations with communities to make sure that we get it right and that we're serving everyone who needs it. And so we've got a couple of questions I'm going to each ask each of these panelists one question, but please chime in as needed. And then also, please, anyone who's got a question, put it in the Whova app. We are happy to take over our agenda with your questions, because your questions are interesting and frankly more important than what we think you guys want to know. But we're going to start with the technological advancement piece. We're going to need technology in order to drive towards smart electrified neighborhoods of the future. So we're going to start with you, Jeanette. Could you speak to what technological advancements are exciting to you right now as we think about what neighborhoods are going to be looking like in the next year, 10, et cetera?
Yeah. There's a lot that I could talk about here, and I'm going to maybe couch it in a couple different ways. One, and I kind of mentioned this in my intro, a lot of the technologies that we're talking about are here, although there are some unique aspects that do present some barriers. So one of the things that we research is how to overcome those technology barriers. I want to bring up maybe a couple of examples. There's recent research that we did that was supported through the Focus on Energy program here in Wisconsin, along with other utilities throughout the Midwest, on heat pump water heaters, basically. So those probably have heard about heat pump water heaters. What you may not know is that there is actually a barrier to entry. And that is that it requires a 240 circuit. And for those folks that don't know what a 240 circuit is, a funny-looking plug that is required for some high, like electricity guzzling appliances. And there are technologies out there called a 120-volt heat pump water heater where you could just plug it into a regular plug. Those aren't really commercially available in the Midwest right now because of some weather barriers, like intake of water, and they're not very common. And so we did some research to understand, well, how would it actually be applied in the Midwest? And that research should be coming out. I don't know if it's exactly public right now, but we want to try to figure out, Focus on Energy hopefully will take that information and figure out, well, this is a technology that can be applied in future homes. And really we're talking about retrofits, because in a new construction building, you could put in that 240-volt system pretty quickly, easily. But when you're talking about retrofits and barriers to entry and cost, to ask an electrician to come to your home to install a 240-volt circuit is going to be an added cost that's going to absolutely be a barrier to entry. What we found is that it works. There are some nuances there. It's a slower water heater, so don't necessarily use it in a high water usage household. But that's just one example. We're also just embarking on a study that's looking at air-to-water heat pumps. So all those homes that have boilers or multifamily buildings that have boilers, could those be heat pumps? So we're talking about electrification of space conditioning. Usually these are either electric boilers, which are using a lot of electricity, not very efficiently, or they're maybe gas or propane boilers. And so transferring to electricity is a really cool technology that, jury's still out. We have to do that research. The one other thing that I will mention, and related to microgrids and things like that, is just the resiliency planning work. So thinking about communities as a whole or neighborhoods as a whole, whether that means using network geothermal, so connecting a lot of geothermal lines to multiple buildings. That takes a lot of planning, forethought. It's happening, I think, in our neighborhoods in Middleton, I think, right now. The other thing is just resiliency planning in terms of community resiliency for these, increasing climate impacts. So making sure that people have a place to go, that maybe there's electric battery storage backup combined with solar. Some of these things are really expensive for possibly cities to invest in, but they are critical infrastructure thinking forward to some of the climate change impacts. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Jeanette. That was really thoughtful and helpful to hear some of the technological opportunities that we're going to be seeing going forward as we think about upgrading the homes that we all live in and spend about 90% of our time inside of. So the next thing I kind of want to chat with you all about is starting to think about who's doing it and who's doing it well, and kind of learn it from the community side. And so I'm going to combine a question that we had on our agenda a little bit with some of the questions that we're getting in here. So Daniel, I'll pose to you this question, which is, could you talk a little bit more about communities or organizations that are doing work in this space already and some of the barriers that they may be facing and the solutions that they're experimenting with to overcome those?
Great question. So, a lot of organizations, I'll stick with tribes. I'll stick with what I know. So I'm not going to try to get into the state conversations, even though we're affected by what the states do. A lot of intertribal organizations are coming together to really support tribes and the multitude of opportunities that are out there. And I don't think this is just tribes experiencing, but across the board, you've seen this massive funding initiative really just come down and just drop into a lot of our laps with really not clear explanations on how to access some of those fundings, right? And so you're seeing a lot of intertribal organizations first come together and really reach out to tribes and other municipalities that are related to or neighboring those tribes to develop strategy and make sure that tribes are having the opportunities and access ramps to those fundings. Some of the things, like when we talk about barriers, the first thing is policies, unfortunately, right? Like you get into any energy project, the first thing you're usually trying to do is look at what policies are going to affect your projects. If you're not, you guys should be, right? Because I've seen projects get deployed, get built, get developed all the way up into the implementation phase, and then they're looking at execution of construction. Lo and behold, the utility has a policy preventing them from true interconnection, right? Or the state has a policy, ruining net metering, or not ruining. I shouldn't say ruin, right? This is Wisconsin. They're working on it, is what I heard. But those are real policies. That net metering policy topic is a real policy barrier. When you're looking at tribes and smaller municipalities trying to interconnect some of these microgrids and mini-grid systems that are providing resiliency to whether it's clinic buildings, wastewater treatment facilities, or just critical infrastructure that they need to have these resiliency, you're seeing a lot of utilities push back with policies. And I think one, that there's a lot, I love that Wisconsin is investigating into this because it's not just, utilities, you have to do this and we should absolutely make this happen. There's repercussions to putting systems on some of these utilities. And so understanding those repercussions, understanding those additional hard barriers, I'll call them, like I think policies aren't hard barriers, those are written documents that can be adjusted and influenced by us. The hard barriers are when you have a radio line that is only single phase that is coming into your municipality or your tribe and has no way of supporting true energy infrastructure. And so what you're seeing is huge collaborations, not just with intertribal organizations, but intertribal organizations reaching out to the neighboring municipalities of tribes, working with the local districts of education, so whether that's a Grid Alternatives who's national, or UW-Madison, which is local to Wisconsin, which already has curriculum. Working with these partners to identify some of the policy issues, but also some of the other issues that we're also seeing within that same realm, workforce development, right? I think we're seeing a lot of this industry build up, but you're not seeing the workforce development piece really rise with a lot of the technologies. And so we need big involvement. We need policies to be adjusted. And we need planners to approach these projects appropriately with policies and workforce development in mind. I was kind of all over the place, but I hope that helped.
That was incredible. I really appreciated that. We're in a sector that is all over the place, so sometimes our answers are all over the place. So I really appreciate what you're saying about the policy barriers and how workforce plays a big part. And Jane, you were talking about workforce earlier, and I know that that's something that Clean Fuels engages in regularly is the policy space. So I'd be curious to hear from your perspective where you see big policy opportunities from the transportation side.
I could talk about this for a really long time. That's a big question too. When I think about neighborhood of the future and transportation policies, I think what comes to mind is something that Jeanette mentioned earlier is building codes. And Montre and I were talking about this Venn diagram between building work and transportation work, and really we're talking about our built environment and how we design our communities. And our building codes and our energy codes dictates a lot of that. And in both Wisconsin and in Michigan, we are working with very old building codes. So our buildings are being built by 2015 standards, not 2025 standards. And so updating those codes so that we're ensuring that new buildings are future-proofed and have the 240-volt receptacles for our electrical appliances and electric vehicle chargers that we know will be needed is really critical. That's a statewide process. I'm sure others on the panel can talk more about what that process looks like in Wisconsin. In Michigan, it has to go through a whole regulatory process, and then those rules need to be approved by the legislature. And our legislature passed on approving those rules last year, so we almost got to the finish line, and now it's kind of back to the start and getting those rules rewritten. So huge opportunities for both Wisconsin and Michigan to update the building and electrical codes so that those buildings are built to best practice to begin with, so we're not retrofitting buildings and trenching through parking lots and things like that. There are opportunities at the municipality level to do some of that work. So communities can look at parking ordinances, and that can require a certain number of electric vehicle ready parking spots. So you have the electrical capacity and the conduit put under the pavement so that when that spot is ready for an EV charger, you can just plop the charger there, run your wires through the conduit, and you're ready to go. And so thinking about that from kind of the community, municipality level as a way to get around some of these larger, more bureaucratic statewide processes, I think is really important and a great policy opportunity that we may be a little bit more in reach for some of our communities right now.
Thanks, Jane. I really appreciate that. Montre, we just had a question come in that I think is perfect for you, so I'm gonna throw it to you on this, which is the role of community support in projects like this. So I'd be curious to hear your perspective on what's the best way, or how do we develop community support from the onset in order to not only have neighborhoods that work for people, but neighborhoods that people are bought in on and excited to be participants in?
That is a good question. Okay, so full transparency, I'm Black, and I grew up believing that climate change was white people hugging trees and polar bears getting skinny. And so I think if we're looking at community and we're going to ask them to be involved, we have to ensure that they're educated and they really feel a part of this work. I think a lot of times barriers just come from who we are and how we interact with folks. And we're not as welcoming as we could or should be. And that's an opportunity for us to get that a lot better than we have. And then we have to go into spaces where people are and not be afraid, like churches and hospitals and community centers and daycares, and say, yes, you too, believe it or not, have a role to play. This is all of us that have to step up and get this right. And so we can't be apologetic about that. Mm-hmm. But I always say that progress moves at the speed of relationships. And so we have to do a much better job of creating strong, trusting relationships within communities. So when we're coming to them saying, wow, look how great this is, they don't get scared and think it's another scam and run and take their resources and ignore it, because this is a moment that can't be ignored. So we have to be extremely intentional in our delivery, in our actions, and in our purpose.
Thanks, Montre. That was really thoughtful. Daniel, I saw you nodding your head quite a bit. Was there anything you wanted to add on to that question?
Not too much. You did a great job answering that. It's just about engagement. Engage early in the processes. I think one of the things I liked about UW and Oliver Schmitz, I'm going to call him out. He's a dear friend of mine, works in the area. I met him because he reached out early in a grant process and wanted to incorporate the Bad River Tribe. And a lot of you guys might be thinking, well, that's not odd, right? it is for tribes. A lot of people don't reach out to tribes or the smaller municipalities until they're in the implementation phase, or they're executing the project, and they're like, here, look at the great things you're getting, and then the community is totally thrown off, like, what? We're having a windmill in our backyard? And so you don't have community buy-in. What Oliver and UW did was reach out to a tribe and engage with them immediately and start the planning and development phase way before the grant was even awarded. That way, when the grant was awarded, UW and the partners, UW, Grid, Madison Technical College, a couple of the other partners all came together and strategized on good community engagement. Now we have these beautiful sections being critiqued right now, community benefits, EJ40. Those are valuable to tribes. You've never seen sections like that in some of these grant applications, and even though they were intensive, they served purpose. And I think it was the first time you really seen federal government look at energy projects holistically, and not just with the implementation in mind, but really the community engagement piece in mind up front. So I think, Manja, you hit it right on the head. Just engage. Sometimes we have to go to churches. Sometimes we have to sit in a center all by ourselves for hours, right? Because we do this, and then there's like one person that shows up, and it's usually the same person. But but we can't be discouraged, and it's those moments. Even if it is that one person giving you feedback, it's engagement, and sooner or later there will be more engagement. Look at Bad River. Bad River's tribe is engaged. The community is engaged. They are excited. They probably are bothering the energy coordinator on a daily basis, wondering when they're going to see solar panels and microgrids and mini grids and EV chargers, and that's great. It may be annoying to the energy project manager, but for the most part, it's great. Thank you.
Thank you both for that perspective. Really appreciate it. A theme that's coming up in the Q&A here that I'm seeing is, what is the role of renters in this transition? Renters have less autonomy and decision-making power than homeowners. However, there are a significant number of renters, particularly those who need this transition the most, who are unsure how to participate in this transition, particularly at the neighborhood level or multifamily level. So, Jeanette, I'll hand this over to you. I'm curious to hear, I know this is a tough question, but what is the role of a renter, and how can they access this from a technology side? Or are there any policies that you're excited about that can be more inclusive to renters?
This is a little sticky wicket, and I think it's been that way for a long time. In the 20 plus years that I've been in this world, there's always been this renter-owner tension in any, and to be honest, probably much longer than that. It's if there's this duality, and if the renter is only paying a certain amount or a certain fuel, and the owner of the building of a multifamily property is paying the rest, whose incentive is it? There's that split incentive that we hear about. Technology-wise, right, I think there's, we want to have everybody have access to these technologies. But at the same time, we know that some of the investments are high. So if this, I was talking about this air to water heat pump work, which, is like possibly addressing some of the central boiler decarbonization that we would see in a lot of multifamily properties around the state. I don't have details, but my guess is it's expensive. Jury's still out, like I said. And so, but what does that look like? So what incentive structures, and I think about policy at this point, I think about incentive structures, education and outreach to building owners that say, this is something that you can do. Hopefully it's affordable. On the flip side, we also want to make sure that there's like agreements that doing these investments don't actually negatively hurt renters or payment, that doesn't increase operational costs. So if, for example, there was central space heating and then you put in heat pumps and now somebody is paying for, put individual, owner or unit occupied heat pumps, that might actually increase an individual's monthly payments. And so I don't know if I have like a huge response in terms of like what you do, except to know that we just need to acknowledge that it's not a clean and straightforward answer to say, oh, we just need to decarbonize everything. I mean, we certainly want to electrify everything. We certainly want to decarbonize, but we also don't want to hurt people in their pockets. We don't want to push people away when we want them to be engaged. So, I think there's just a lot of acknowledgement to address there, that there is these sticky problems. I will also give a nod, and Jane teed this up really nicely, is that when we talk about building codes, that is like step one, easy answer. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe not easy. We could talk about that for a second. But it is like making sure that the building itself is built to the highest efficiency as possible so that people that live there are paying the low. And there is that split, not necessarily always renter. It could be developer and owner. It could be a developer-owner split incentive. The developer wants to build something cheap or wants to make more money. They have their own business demands, but then, we want full disclosure on how a building is going to operate. Is it the highest efficiency as possible? Do we have policies in place to protect the owners in an operational sense? Like, are they going to pay higher energy bills? So I feel like there's a lot that I just went through. I don't know if I solved any problems.
I wouldn't. Oh, go ahead.
See someone that group developing stuff. The incentives are built for the homeowners. But if you take that same gentleman or lady, and let's say that Janie owns 45 properties, she can't incentivize, there's no incentivization for her to take her 45 properties and put solar or put any geothermal or anything. So the neighbor would have access to that incentive. If you're gonna open it up and you wanna have them, because I know people who own 200 homes. They're renting out to 200 families. That would be a big imprint if we could open up the policy to say it's per home as opposed to, because you're really taking out the investor. The investor cannot utilize these, so now they have no choice but to put it back on the renter because it's an expense. They'd love to. I personally know a good friend of mine that would love to. He goes, I can't. Because even with my program, with what I do, which is very different, he goes, unless we can tap into, and they open it up to per home. And maybe if we could look at it from that perspective of, we can open up that policy that way as opposed to the owner, you're gonna get a lot of buy-in. There's a lot of those investors, they'd love to save money themselves and, and for their clients, because then they're more receptive to the community. And you're gonna pay less an electric bill over here, of course you're gonna rent it.
Thanks for that perspective. Really appreciate it. And to be,
Add a little bit?
yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, were you gonna?
I have thoughts, but you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing that up. I also am a very, very small real estate investor. I've got 2 rental properties, and so I have a little bit of that perspective. And I also was a renter for many years, and I chose an apartment building because it had an EV charger and solar on the roof. So, we're not talking about a hypothetical renter or customer who's picking their rental dwelling because they have these services. And so I think what we could be doing better is also communicating to property owners the value of offering these amenities to their renters, because they're going to get tenants that, frankly, at this point, if you drive an electric vehicle, you probably make more than average. You probably have a decent credit score, so they're good tenants. But that'll change, right? There will be used electric vehicles on the market. This will trickle down toward more affordable housing. And having these technologies on your property increases your property values. So you can install an electric vehicle charger or maybe a bank of 10 level 2 chargers in your parking lot or in your parking garage. Charge your tenant an extra $50 to have access to that charger. Tenant's still making, saving money because they're not spending $250 at the gas station every month. They're getting their electricity, their fuel for $50 a month. Increases net revenue for the property owner, increases their property value. And so I think we could be speaking people's language a little bit better on this. And then I'll also say in Michigan, just last week, it was announced there's a new grant opportunity to help pay for electric vehicle chargers at multifamily dwellings to facilitate that level 2 overnight charging. Super exciting. all the way down to duplexes. And it can cover up to 100% of the cost if those properties are in environmental justice communities. There's the Michigan EJ screening tool to determine where those locations are. And Clean Fuels Michigan, we published a resource on this last week too, because we knew that grant was coming out. And so if you're looking for a tool to talk to property owners about the value of installing charging, we have a new resource. It is slightly Michigan specific because it has information about that grant, but a lot of it is, here's what an EV charger is, here's answering some common questions about liability and how you charge your customers and all of that. So I encourage you to check that out if you are talking to property owners.
Thanks, Jane. You pre-answered a question in the Q&A, so I love that. Jeanette, did you have more to add? You said you might.
I think your point is a good one, and I also feel like there's that education component and for developers, and we're talking about like new construction and applying some of these technologies may have a learning curve. Maybe I'll say that yes, there is a learning curve, but we're aware, and actually I'm not as aware. So if you guys have more background in Wisconsin, but like in Illinois, in the Chicago area, we had we organized this presentation. There was a developer who builds a high-performing buildings for affordable housing and pencils it out using all different kinds of funding, figures out the technology that works and makes it attractive to people that want to live there. And they're cool houses, they're cool multifamily properties, and it works. But he recognized even that this was his dedication to that. And so I think there's education that we can share some of those examples around and make it feel like less of a hill to climb.
Thank you both. A theme I keep hearing in this conversation is education and community outreach. But education must be done effectively. There's a lot of examples out there of education that was not done thoughtfully or effectively. And we've got some questions here around what are some effective methods and tools we have to not only educate people on the opportunities of smart neighborhoods, but also overcome disinformation and false claims. And so, Daniel, I'll hand this one to you. Do you have any perspective on some of the tools and strategies that might be effective when communicating with the everyday person?
Made me think a little bit. Don't fray away from the normal tools and the normal systems that are already put in place. I think a lot of times we try to address some of these questions like how do you approach people, how do you approach the common person, right? It's reach out to normal pathways. Sometimes radio news announcements and stuff are heard way more than even YouTube announcements or other regular channels. So not negating even the traditional outlets of communication I think are important to get information around. Misinformation is always going to be out there. You're not going to avoid it. And identifying what is misinformation and what is quality information or true to what it is you believe in is there's a lot of caveats to that, right? Especially being a tribe. I've seen a lot of projects come with great intentions, right? But were they really done with great intentions, or at the end of the project was it was those great attentions or qualities seen? And I think for the most part sometimes they're not. And so how do you educate the common person, the common developer? You exploit them to resources. You use some of the traditional, even educational paths. I've emphasized UW-Madison, grid alternatives, MAT, technical college. These institutions are institutions for a reason, right? They're educational institutions. Somewhere that's probably in their definition. And grid alternative has been building up specifically for tribal nations across the United States and beyond. I think they even went to Mexico. But, understanding that there's resources out there, there's organizations building up specifically to provide information on these topics is important, and using that, exploiting it. If UW is creating good templates on what microgrids and mini grids and EV chargers are, use that. You know, don't try to recreate the wheel and recreate something under your own terms or your own vision sometimes, because that's where you get the skewed misinformation. And I think tribes are great at that. So I'll take it from a tribal perspective. We take a lot of information and then put it into a tribal perspective, which is great for tribal people, right? But then a non-tribal person might come in and be like, well, why is this tree more important than the solar panel? I just don't understand it. Get into real decarbonization. You'll understand why a tree is more important than a solar panel sometimes. But, you know, just understanding that there's those educational pathways that already exist, and exploiting those is, I think, you're very useful.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that perspective. So we have time for one more question, which I'm going to throw over to you, Montre. So far, we've talked about the role of the community, the role of businesses, the role of nonprofits in this space, but there's also the role of state and local government. And so, Montre, I ask you to speak to, what do you see the role of the state government beyond, creating incentives and setting mandates when possible? I think those are obvious pathways, but are not always easy to do. What do you see the role of state and or local governments in participating with transforming a clean energy economy for the neighborhood of the future?
Good question again. First and foremost, to acknowledge that, we're in a crisis. I think that's hugely important. We shouldn't be speaking different languages to seriously know and understand how do we move our state, our country forward. And secondly, I am often appalled how uneducated our elected officials are on some of these issues. And so we, first and foremost, have to hold them accountable, and then they have to also hold themselves accountable to simply knowing and understanding, the space and what's truly happening. And so I think that can go both ways. But again, just simply having that access to real information, not, some of this other stuff that we have to shift through, could be hugely helpful. And I think often, one thing that I can definitely say about, the other side, they always come ready. They come with a plan, they come with it locked in, and they're literally giving their elected officials information. This is what we want, this is what you should do, and this is how you should do it. When we're going to get there, I don't know, but it'll be a beautiful day.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming to this panel. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you to our 4 fabulous panelists. They did such a good job today. If you have questions for them, please come up and ask them now or throughout the panel or throughout the summit. And thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Have a good day, y'all.